The Silliest Deaths in History, Part 2. In a world of constant scientific revolution and innovation, it's required that any new theories be put to the test with reliable and repeatable proofs. Otherwise, you're about as useful as a flat earther. But sometimes that proof puts people in harm's way. Take, for instance, one Jesse William Lazier. This handsome block of cheddar was an American physician in the late 1800s, though he did live to see the new century, just not for very long. But we'll get to that in a bit. Growing from a well-to-do boy into a well-to-do man, Lazier had a passion for helping the ill and minimizing all of the icky sickies that had plagued humanity throughout history. So he took that passion and put it to good use, receiving his doctorate in medicine from Columbia University in 1892. Upgrading himself from graduate to practicing physician in 1895, Lazier focused his studies on two major diseases, the infectious malaria and the deadly yellow fever, both of which were stirring up all kinds of problems in the late 1800s, the worst of which being that people were dying. But exactly how these diseases were being spread so easily, particularly in the southern United States and in the Caribbean, remained a mystery, for a few more years at least. Well, that's not exactly true. You see, about 14 years earlier, Cuban public health professional disease researcher guy Carlos Finlay came up with a theory. He proposed that some diseases, particularly yellow fever, could be transmitted through the bite of a single infected mosquito. It's a rather simple theory. An itty-bitty mosquito bites an infected monkey, acquires the yellow fever, flies away, finds a healthy human, gives the suck and leaves behind yellow fever, and the cycle continues. Now, if you've ever spent more than 2 seconds in the American South, you know just how bad them little shits can get. So if there's a few infected people and a lot of mosquitoes, things are gonna spread faster than a bad joke at a dad convention. Oh, come on, I'm hungry. He said it. Finlay laid out his research and presented his nido-mosquito theory to the scientific community, opting for control over the mosquito population to minimize the spread. And they all laughed at him. All them stupid science bitches ridiculed and mocked Finlay's theory, brushing it off as complete nonsense. But now we fast forward more than a decade, and a very confident Lazier was willing to put that theory to the test. On himself. Right here's an infected skater, and here's an uninfected me. So, if it bites me and I get infected, well, there you go. And so, in September of 1900, Lazier was deliberately bitten by an infected mosquito. He contracted yellow fever and died several days later. But his sacrifice would not be in vain, as it confirmed Finlay's theory, subsequently revolutionizing the control of yellow fever, including controlling the mosquito population. The age of exploration saw a lot of exploring from many a capable sea captain. But amongst the Columbuses and Marco Polos of history, some have fallen through the cracks, their deeds and accomplishments forgotten to time, or just not important enough for people to care. Johnny Kendrick was one such captain. Ever since growing up aboard Papa Kendrick's whaling vessel in his teenage years, John had a love of the sea, which explains the vast success he found in his later years. This guy was more American than a strapped apple pie asking for a tip. A member of the American Sons of Liberty, Kendrick personally took part in the famous Boston Tea Party, hucking countless crates of precious British life fuel into the harbor. He also commanded a privateer ship during the American Revolution, attacking and capturing British warships with his crew of 104 men, even going as far as helping convince the French to join the fight. After helping America get its independence, Kendrick took to the seas once more, this time on a more exploratory venture. Teaming up with famous explorer ship-sailing captain fellow Robert Gray, whom you've probably never heard of, the two bros made history, leading the first U.S. expedition to the Pacific Northwest, where they established a strong fur trade route. This was mainly trading goods like mirrors and knives to purchase sea otter pelts from local natives. Hey, gotta do what you gotta do, you know? Kendrick also made himself at home in Hawaii in the late 1700s. There, he built up a pretty lucrative sandalwood trade hub, harvesting the wood in Hawaii and shipping it off to China, who treasured the luscious lumber for its durability, medicinal and therapeutic properties, and of course, its smell. Oh, that's good wood. So Kendrick spent many a year just jamming as much of his wood as he could into China's supple trading ports, skipping back and forth across the Pacific Pond between mainland China and the Hawaiian Islands. But Hawaii, historically speaking, often had a bunch of fighting between chiefs of the different islands. Each chief, understandably enough, wanted to expand their respective territories and influence. Well, when returning to the islands in 1794, Kendrick found Hawaii to be in complete turmoil, with two chiefs duking it out to be the big chief in charge. One of the tribes was being supplied by Captain William Brown, a proper Brit who was willing to get some land for the British crown. Kendrick replied he too supplied a chief of great renown, and put to the test Kendrick did his best to smack the captain down. So in December of 1794, a battle commenced with Captain Brown supporting the chief of Oahu and Kendrick supporting the chief of Kauai. How cute. The tropical tussle ended with Kendrick's side being victorious, inspiring him to celebrate the only way a true American knows how, by firing off loud guns. As planned, Kendrick's ship had ignited a volley of cannon fire. Although his side had lost, Captain Brown, determined to uphold proper British etiquette, agreed to discharge a volley of his own cannons in Kendrick's honor. Oh, this turtle soup is to die for. Well, that's what you get for slurping your soup. Ugh, turns out in a complete honest mistake, Captain Brown forgot to unload shot from one of his cannons before firing it off. Some historical accounts claim that grape shot tore through Kendrick's cabin, creating complete chaos and quickly killing the competent captain as he crunched on a collation of consumables. Oh, sorry about that, it's completely my fault. Yep, that Jack Daniel, the two first-name having freak who founded the famous Jack Daniel's Tennessee Whiskey Company. You know, that succulent spirit that did, will, or is getting you through those tough college days or life in general. That's the one. Well, little Jackie Boy was born in Tennessee in the mid-1800s as the youngest of 10, mainly because his birth was the one that sent his beloved mother skyward. Very sad. Now, unfortunately, not much is known about Jack's early life because them town records don't went caught fire. Most of the insight that we do have into Jack's life actually comes from the Jack Daniel's Company historical records. Teeny tiny Jack, the youthful entrepreneur that he was, yearned for work at the ripe old age of 8. The man to answer Jack's call was this guy, Dan Call, a preacher, a screecher, and one distilling creature. And of course it would be here that Jack would find his calling. Something about Jack caught Dan's eye, and he saw real potential in the little tyke. This boy's gonna make a fine whiskey one day, I tell you what. And so, according to company history, an 8-year-old Jack began learning the art and science of distillation from one Nathan Green, a master distiller and slave under Dan Call. Fast forward several years and Dan hit a crossroad. Given an ultimatum by his wife, Dan had to choose between his relationship with his tasty spirits or the Holy Spirit. The Reverend chose his Lord and Savior, saving his soul and his liver in the process. In that choice, Dan had sold his prized distillery to none other than his favorite pupil, Jack Daniel, whose first act as new owner was to hire on his friend and mentor Nathan Green as the company's master distiller. He also employed Nathan's 2 adult sons and, later down the line, his grandsons. Now, the Jack Daniel's website really emphasizes that Jack never owned slaves. So if you disagree, don't look at me. I'm just a guy on the internet. A man of all business and no pleasure, Jack never married nor had any children of his own. He did, however, take his nephews under his wing to learn the business, eventually handing the distillery down to them in 1907 once his health bar had reached a solid yellow. But it would be a few years later in 1911 before Jack would kick the bucket, or in this case, something much heavier. According to legend, Jack Daniel, now in his 60s or so, had forgotten the combination to a personal safe housing a bunch of valuables like safes are typically designed to do. In his frustration, Jack tried to solve the problem in true US Southerner fashion, by putting a boot up its ass. But since a safe has buns of literal steel, Jack instead broke his toe, causing a severe blood infection. Jack Daniel reportedly died of blood poisoning on October 9th, 1911. But is this story true? I don't know. Here's a rather recent one for you. Back in 1993, when the world was witnessing the birth of the internet, Czechoslovakia was checking out, and President Clinton was gearing up to suck or be sucked at his job, Gary Hoy was about to meet his untimely death. An extremely successful business partner and corporate and securities law specialist for the Holden Day Wilson law firm in Toronto, Canada, Gary was living it up. But he would quickly learn that it's a long fall from the top. Gary had a reputation as a very personable guy, always loving to talk to people, share wisdom, and loved cracking a few jokes here and there. But on July 9th, 1993, one of Gary's jokes would fall flat. While attending a reception in the office on a Friday, Gary decided to give a tour of the office to a group of accounting and law students, which of course was a typical routine for Gary's charismatic character. But what happens next would be cemented in the minds of everyone around him. While on the tour of the 24th floor office, Gary decided to whip out his signature move. Boasting about the structural integrity of Canadian architecture and the seemingly unbreakable glass office windows, Gary charged full speed towards one of said windows, a party trick he apparently had performed successfully many times in the past. Typical Gary. But this time, he was also successful. Gary bounced right off of the glass without a hitch, to the applause and laughter of the students. Y'all wanna see me do it again?
Yeah!
No, not really. Gary was about to push his luck, and a little too hard on the window. Gary charged once more, hitting the glass at a sprint. Now, to his credit, the glass didn't break, but the entire window frame dislodged from its setting, causing Gary to plunge the full 24 stories to his death. The students and various colleagues stood paralyzed and horror-struck after witnessing Gary's fall, not to mention the witnesses on the ground where Hoy's body had landed. Following the incident, many of the firm's lawyers received professional counseling, but some chose to part ways with the company, eventually leading to its full closure in 1996. Talk about having a falling out. Each of us wants to accomplish our own big motivational concrete goals before crossing the eternal finish line. A loving family, traveling the world, subscribing to this channel, which you can do right now. But as the Rolling Stones once said, you can't always get what you want. But if you try sometimes, I forget the rest. Anyway, this is Frank Hayes, and he has his own goal, to win a race. A horse race. Problem is though, he is no professional jockey. A young Irish fella born in Ireland in 1901, Frank grew up as a stable boy and eventually an apprentice horse trainer under James Frayling, a wealthy gent who owned and bred professional racing horses. Paying close attention to Frank's rather small stature, Frayling gave Frank an opportunity to race as a jockey. And he lost. But apparently not too bad, because he was given a second chance in 1923. One small snag in this plan, however, was that Frank was a tad too heavy. Jockeys were required to weigh less than 130 pounds in order to qualify for racing. Ideally, the slimmer and sleeker your jockey is, the less of a burden he is for the horse, allowing for a higher potential speed. Less mass, go fast. And so, Frank was given a doozy of a task. Lose 12 pounds in a few days. And that's a big ask for someone already in a healthy weight range, but Frank was determined to strap in the saddle once more. Through what I can only imagine were extremely unhealthy choices, the frail Frank ended up making the cut, and was given the thumbs up to participate in the race, though he was nowhere near expected to win, with him and his horse only given 20-1 odds. On June 4th, 1923, Frank mounted his horse, named Sweet Kiss, and prepared to travel around the track. The racers were off, and Sweet Kiss quickly trailed behind the group. However, in the final stretch, Sweet Kiss apparently kicked in maximum overdrive and managed to close the gap, with Frank appearing locked in, closely hugging the horse's neck. In an extreme upset, Sweet Kiss actually won the race by a pretty respectable lead. But after dropping from a gallop to a canter to a walk, Frank was still closely gripping the steed. Frank Hayes was dead. During the race, Frank's heart gave out, presumably from the extreme and unhealthily fast weight drop sustained to get into the race in the first place. So yeah, Sweet Kiss carried a corpse across the finish line. Frank Hayes photo finished into the great beyond at the age of 22. Or 35, depending on whatever source you read. I know that's a big discrepancy, but welcome to history. Unfortunately, Sweet Kiss, now superstitiously dubbed Sweet Kiss of Death, never ran another race as jockeys refused to mount the mare, fearing a similar fate. So of course, it was the end of her show, and she got her final curtain call. Speaking of which, that's the end of this video. Want me to eventually make a part 3? Let me know with a comment. And be sure to check out part 1 if you haven't. I've got it right here for you. I'll see you over there.